Hello folks, welcome to the latest video on the 172nd Fighter Wing channel. Thank you for tuning in, and if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe, just so that I know that you guys and girls out there watching this like what I'm doing and appreciate the content. As always, please leave your feedback for me in the appropriate space below in the comment box, and I look forward to hearing from other people who are enthusiasts and interested in aviation and are passionate about these kind of things. So today's topic is going to be about the F-16, specifically the Shaw posted 77 Fighter Squadron Gamblers F-16CJ that Calibre Wings has just released. Let me just start the video off by saying that Calibre Wings has done a wonderful job modeling this F-16, and I'm glad to have it in my collection. I'm even happier to be in a position to both show this video to you folks out there who may not have the ability to see these in person, but also to be in a position to compare it to the other major F-16 modeling company in the business, which is Hobbymaster, as shown here in the form of this F-16C Block 50 right here in the colors of the 114th Fighter Wing South Dakota Air National Guard. So just to give a little background, I ordered this guy over here because I was stationed in South Dakota when I was active duty, and there's a little bit of kind of a sentimental connection that I have to that particular fighter squadron, which just kind of forced me to order this guy when it came out. So I do happen to like the color scheme too. I think it looks pretty nice, but you know, that's the motivation behind me ordering the Hobbymaster alongside this Calibre Wings F-16 right here. We're not going to talk too much about the Hobbymaster F-16 because that's just here for a point of comparison later in the video. More to the point where I'm concluding about the value of the Calibre Wings version, because let me just say at the beginning, the Calibre F-16 is probably the best die-cast F-16 on the market in 1/72nd scale that modern currency can buy. So if Noel's goal at I almost said Hobbymaster. And if Noel's goals at Calibre Wings was to make the best die-cast F-16 on the market, he succeeded. I think we can all safely conclude that. However, that's not necessarily a slam dunk for why someone should necessarily purchase this guy. More on that later. So let's talk about a little bit of the history of the F-16, because there was a time period actually at the beginning when the F-16 almost didn't happen. I was surprised to discover during my research for this video that apparently in the 1970s, the Air Force Air Staff, which is composed of about 12 of the senior 3-star and 4-star generals in the U.S. Air Force, this kind of a panel of people who make the decisions in terms of aircraft planning and orders and things like that. The panel of people in 1977 actually didn't want to buy the F-16. I was surprised to see this, considering the obviously majorly important and adaptable role that the F-16 has had in both the U.S. Air Force and in other air forces as well. So in my research, I discovered that the air staff wanted to just buy more F-15s basically, and it's kind of interesting how the story of the F-16 turned out. Most of the enthusiasts out there are probably aware that the F-16 came about as a result of the lightweight fighter competition, which compared the prototype F-16 to the prototype of what we would later know as the F-18 Hornet. And the idea was the Air Force was going to compare these airplanes and then purchased whichever one completed and met most of the requirements through the prototype fly-off. And in that case, it was the F-16 design that won. Now afterwards, the air staff of the Air Force were actually not going to order this guy. They had made the conclusion that they wanted to buy more F-15s, which at the time was the Air Force's hottest airplane in the inventory. So the thought process was they were happy to have the F-16 as an evaluation exercise, but that was as far as the air staff of the U.S. Air Force in the 1970s felt that they needed to take things. They didn't feel the need to order the F-16 as a combat airplane. So they were going to recommend that the aircraft be canceled, and it took the intervention of the Secretary of Defense and Colonel Robert Boyd, or John Boyd, I'm sorry. There's an intervention of Colonel John Boyd and the Secretary of Defense at the time to appeal directly to the top general of the Air Force, the Chief of Staff, who sits over the Air Staff. It took an appeal directly from those entities to the top general of the Air Force to have the F-16 approved for production. And the reason for this intervention by the Secretary of Defense at the behest of Colonel John Boyd was due to the numeric situation that NATO had at the time. So this is going to take things back to a little bit of a historical time machine kind of thing. But back in the 1970s, NATO had a pretty major aircraft deficit compared to the Soviet Union. So the numbers, let me pull the notes here, the numbers actually are pretty stark. According to NATO's own documentation from their declassified files, in 1975, Soviet air forces had about 2,460 tactical aircraft in the European theater. This is compared to NATO's 1,700. So that includes all of the NATO air forces of the time in combination with the U.S. air forces that were deployed on station in Europe. So overall, the Soviet air forces had outnumbered NATO 1.4 to 1 in 1975. And this is, of course, before the F-16 was accepted for production and service in 1978. So we can already see that there's a major a 1.4 to 1 deficit in NATO versus Soviet air power. Now, of course, the thinking by the generals was the NATO aircraft were so technically superior to anything that Soviet Russia could muster that the 1.4 to 1 deficit wasn't a big deal, essentially. And other minds in the military and other minds at the Pentagon felt different. And especially when the thought process was done around, okay, if NATO and the U.S. orders F-15s, the U.S. would have to obviously cut their number of aircraft to support buying F-15s, which meant that the force structure would get smaller, which meant the outnumbered situation would get even worse. So the Secretary of Defense was looking at the situation and didn't think that buying more F-15s was going to be the answer. And of course, exporting the latest and greatest U.S. fighter to every ally in NATO was also not something that the Secretary of Defense was all that keen about doing. So between those two factors, he went over the Air Force's own recommendations to cancel the F-16 in favor of just buying more F-15s. And as time has gone on, that has proven to be a very wise decision, not just for the U.S., but also for the 25 other operators of the F-16 who all more or less to this day still fly them. It's kind of an interesting thought exercise to see what NATO and the U.S. military would look like today if the F-16 were never adopted. It's almost like trying to picture a world without the Beatles. I mean, it's just your brain just gets uncomfortable thinking about it, right? But that almost happened. That outcome almost happened. And I don't see that talked about a lot, but it's certainly an interesting point of history. I mean, it's like if one of those, it's like a TV show that just came out about what if the Soviet Union made it to the moon instead of America first? What if the F-16 had never been approved for production? It's kind of a trippy thought process if you're somebody that's into aviation, to kind of sit down with your morning or afternoon or evening coffee and kind of think about that. I mean, would the modern Air Force even be able to do what it does with just F-15s and the other aircraft in the inventory? Kind of makes you think a little bit. So the F-16 was accepted for service in 1978, as I mentioned earlier, and it has done a really good job in service ever since then. And the Air Force still plans on flying them past 2025. The idea, as I understand it, was for the F-35 to replace them, but because of delays in the F-35 program, the F-16s are getting midlife updates. So I guess when you watch this video in the future, you'll probably know more about when it's retired than I will. But at this point, the F-16 is still set to be a primary service aircraft into 2025 and past that. So it's definitely a proven platform, and the F-16 model that you see before you is of a particularly special bird. It's special for a couple of reasons. The first is it's not your ordinary F-16. This one happens to be a suppression of enemy air defenses or SEAD model. This is an F-16CJ. This is different from the other F-16s in that it is equipped with avionics to engage and fight surface-to-air missile systems in the Wild Weasel support mission. So you see here it has the AGM-88 HARMS, it has the Harm Targeting System, or HTS, and then you can kind of see behind the fuel tank right over here as I'm pointing, that is the ALQ-131 ECM system. This is done to kind of disable and mislead enemy radar systems, particularly useful when you're fighting SAMs. And it has a whole bunch of internal avionics changes that are designed to help with combating and fighting surface-to-air missile systems. So this aircraft is a bit of a special one, and its mission is pretty important. The Weasel mission is pretty much critical to any kind of modern day use of air power, especially with the prevalence of high technology SAMs in the modern battle space. So originally the F-16 was designed to just complement the F-4s, which were the initial generation previous to this one for Wild Weasel aircraft. The F-4s had more sophisticated homing systems and avionics at the time. So during Desert Storm and just afterwards, the F-4s would be like the primary electronic tracking and sourcing aircraft, and then the F-16s would act as flying, it's been termed flying hardpoints because they would carry more missiles. The F-4s could only carry 2 AGM-88s at a time, usually. They could carry more than that, but generally 2 of the stations were taken up with fuel tanks, so that limited them to just carrying 2 HARM missiles. So with the F-16s flying wing on the F-4s during Desert Storm, both aircraft would fly in concert to knock out surface-to-air missile systems as needed. And that's definitely some examples out there of Desert Storm SAM engagements show the Wild Weasel job is a critical one for any kind of serious air power initiative. So definitely an important job, an important mission, and after the Desert Storm campaign, the F-16s were given the mission full time. The F-4s were retired just after Desert Storm. So then the technology and avionics that were used by the F-4 to locate the radars were installed in the F-16s, and of course much more modern versions. So you can also see that where these little bumps right here are where some antennas are mounted for some of the ECM systems on the aircraft. So all that being said, the F-16CJ that you see here is a pretty important aircraft, and it's an important mission that, as I understand it, this airplane is still in service doing today. So that's the first element that needs to be discussed about this guy, is that it is a pretty unique F-16 among F-16s. But the other interesting aspect of this guy is that it's a model of an F-16 that shot down a MiG-29. So during operations over the Balkans, this F-16 shot down a MiG-29. So pretty neat to see that bit of history involved there, which is unusual, and it's kind of interesting, and it illustrates kind of something about the F-16 where most of the air-to-air kills that this aircraft has logged as a model have happened under foreign air forces like Israel and other ones. And the reason for this is because basically the way the U.S. uses these is they're mainly air-to-ground or special mission aircraft. They're not generally used for air-to-air, which is kind of an inversion of what the airplane was designed for. It was originally intended to be a lightweight day fighter with, actually didn't even have a radar in it. It was just going to be a lightweight, affordable, easy to produce airplane that could be thrown against the horde of 2,000 plus Soviet airplanes and not be expensive to operate or maintain or be burdened with a lot of avionics and equipment. And well, we see now today that the movement of warfare has changed drastically from what they planned this thing to do in the 70s. So even though it is very capable as an air-to-air platform, the U.S. Air Force almost never uses it for that mission. So Majority of them are used for either air to ground or, again, special mission tasks like this F-16CJ hunting down SAMs. So unusual to see an Air Force F-16 get an air-to-air kill, but this guy did one. So kind of a unique bit of history for this example. So the F-16, now we can actually start talking about the model, and this is where I feel conflicted. I feel conflicted because this is an excellent model from the standpoint of just detail. The engine nozzle is beautiful. The interior of the engine is nicely detailed. You can take this guy apart and take the engine completely out. You can show it with the speed brakes open or closed. You can show it with the airplane in flight or on the ground that you see here. You can even take the radome off of the front and show it with the radome to the side and the APG radar exposed. So you can actually display this with the radar open, the engine out, and they include a ladder and a tray so you can put the engine on a push cart and show the engine outside of the airplane, which I thought about doing for this video, but it's somewhat involved. You have to take the bottom of the airplane. This whole bottom section has to detach. You have to slide it away from the tail hook, which is tucked into the back a little bit. And then there are pre-made slots in the top of the airplane where the bottom, which includes the engine intake, is connected to. So it's relatively straightforward to take it apart. However, it is a bit of work to do that. And then you also have to put it all back together again, which again does take some time. But if there are some YouTube videos by Noel of Calibre rings on showing how that all works and what it looks like with the engine out and then the engine in. And obviously, it's going to be personal preference whether you like those things or not, but I think it's amazing that he sought to put that much detail into this aircraft, in this model. So definitely an attaboy to Noel and Calibre Wings team as a whole for making this happen. So as a model, it's extraordinarily detailed. The missiles have really good detail on them, and as far as the quality aspect of it, the paint is spot on. I mean, it's a great looking model. And if it were just about which model was the best of all of them, I think the video could probably just end right here because the Calibre model is really, really well done. However, the reason I have an F-16 from Hobby Master in the background shot here is to illustrate a point. And I think it's worth noting because the cost of the F-16 from Calibre is not, to me, it's not what would qualify as cheap. Right now, at this point, as of this video, they're selling retail for $150. They're kind of getting a bit scarce now. I believe this model is actually sold out from Calibre direct. I think there are some vendors right now that still sell them, but stock is a bit low on these guys. So by the time you watch this, they may have already been completely sold out and exclusively available on the secondary market, where I expect they will not be affordable. If Hobby Master's F-16s are any indication, this guy is going to be worth a pile of money in the future. So the point I want to make on referencing Hobby Master here is that the cost of this is already relatively high among F-16 models. The Calibre wings you see before you retails for about $150 where I live, and that is the most expensive F-16 172 scale model on the market by far. The next one down in price is going to be the Hobby Master variants, and while the prices on those do vary somewhat depending on the color scheme and the model that you order, they generally run from anywhere from $90 to about $110, give or take. So some of them tend to be in high demand, like the Aggressor Squadron Ghost one. That one I saw on eBay recently for like $200 out the door, which is, yeah, supply and demand in action, right? So that's not unusual to see that with certain Hobby Master models. They tend to get certain ones get high in demand because they look cool. So that's not unusual to see, but normally they're about $110, $120 tops. And this is where we get to the topic around value for money. See, if it's just about getting the best F-16 model, I would just say stick with the Calibre that you see in front of you. However, not everyone sees the utility in having an airplane that can be reconfigured as much as Calibre lets you do here. I can see a lot of people who would look at this airplane and think, well, it's nice that you can take the engine out and you can show it with the, the engine removed and the engine separately on a push cart, and you can have the ladder and all that. But then if you don't care about those accessories, is the $150 retail price really an advantage versus the less expensive Hobbymaster, which will be about $110 to $120? That is the question, and I'm pointing it out because the Hobbymaster behind it, it's still a good model. I mean, the Hobbymaster F-16, you can see with your own eyes, it's a pretty darn cool model. There are areas where the Calibre just runs away from the Hobbymaster, especially in the area of the engine detail. What I might do next time is I might actually take the engine and just repaint this guy, paint the whole nozzle like silver, and then trim that out, because it has the same engine, the Block 50 General Electric engine as this guy, and you can tell right away from this engine nozzle to that engine nozzle off over here, you can see this guy is way nicer finish. So I may decide to just do that as a personal project, but that just goes to show you that there are tangible differences between the models, but the key is, are those tangible differences worth the additional $50 premium? And honestly, that's not something that I can just declare by fiat on this video for everyone who might care to watch. So that's something that you as the viewer will have to determine for yourself, if the Calibre's extras and its looks and appeal are worth it for you. If they are, well, you're going to enjoy it. If it's not for you, well, it's just going to be something, if you go with something like like a Air Force One that's $79 or a Hobbymaster that's $100, you're probably still going to be happy. I mean, the Hobbymaster F-16 back here still looks pretty darn nice for the money, and if you were on a budget or you just don't see the utility in having a model that can be reconfigured like the Calibre wings can, the Hobbymaster is a perfectly, not just acceptable, perfectly reasonable and beautiful model to have in your collection too. So as far as which one is better, that's something that each of us as collectors will have to determine for ourselves. But I am glad to say that I can have both of these in my collection, and I'm really privileged and thankful that I can do that. And I'm also really privileged and thankful that I don't have to make a decision about which one to get, because boy, that's pretty difficult. It's like choosing between, if we think of the Calibre in front here as like a Rolls Royce, and we think of the Hobbymaster right here as a Mercedes Benz, which one would I rather be driven in the back of? Honestly, it's a coin toss, right? Either way, you're getting something amazing. So it's just a question of whether the prestige of one is worth the substantially higher cost of entry than the other. And that's something I can't answer for everyone. Honestly, I can probably barely answer it for myself, and I own both. So that's my thoughts on it. I think that Noel, again, has done a really good job with the Calibre F-16, and I look forward to seeing some more of their offerings as they come out. And I also look forward to seeing what Hobbymaster might do in response too. Maybe they'll come out with some later models with, say, better engine nozzle detail from the factory, or maybe some nicer paint finishes and different combinations there. I'm glad to see competition. It usually means that people tend to perform better because they end up competing with each other. So I look forward to seeing what the future has in store from both of these brands in F-16 offerings. And again, I'm really happy to be in a position to share these models with you guys here on the channel. So thank you again for tuning in and watching to this point. Feel free to leave your feedback in the appropriate places below. Thank you for watching.